What's going on, everybody? Mike Marino here from Baruch College, class CIS 3367. As instructed by our professor, Professor Wheeler, we are to put together a project within Excel that utilizes specific Excel functions. Those Excel functions include Power Pivot, Power Tables, Power View, and dashboards. So, little itinerary before we start. I'm going to talk about the purpose of the spreadsheet. Then we're going to talk about some of the specific Excel features that were utilized in the project, and then out of those features, the ones that I found most helpful for my project. So, without further ado, purpose of the spreadsheet. So I love fantasy football. I play fantasy football every single Sunday, and I've been playing for many, many years, and I'm always trying to get an edge on who to pick, how can I beat someone, things like that. Now, I've recently deviated towards daily fantasy football, which allows you to pick a different team each and every week. Now, with that, these sites say, okay, you could pick anyone that you want to pick, but we're going to put constraints on them. And those constraints are shown here in this lineup table. As you can see here, this is my lineup. We have a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wideouts, a tight end, a kicker, and a defense. And what these sites say is, okay, you got to stay within a certain budget, given that we're going to give each player a certain salary cap. So, for instance, Aaron Rodgers, a quarterback, has a salary of $8,800. That's how much he's worth. So if I want him on my team, I'm paying $8,800. Now, I have to stay within this constraint right here, $60,000 for my total team budget. So I'm going to take the total salary, make sure that it's under $60,000, which it is here, and then we're good to go. So that's pretty much the basis of daily fantasy football. So now that we know the purpose of the spreadsheet, let's talk about some of the Excel features that were utilized in the project. That being is the dashboard, as we see here, which gives us a visual representation of what's going on with data, being able to analyze it in a different way, look at it through a different lens. Also utilize some slicers here just to customize the data to your liking and what you're trying to look for. And also some pivot tables, which I'll get into a little bit later, but pivot tables and dashboards, the 2 Excel features utilized in the project. Now let's walk through some of the tabs that I have down here, just to clarify some things. So as I mentioned before, I have my lineup over here, which I picked before starting the recording, and we can also see that in the lineup tab. Same exact thing that we saw on the dashboard. Now here is where we can actually change who's in our lineup. So for instance, we have a quarterback right here, right? Aaron Rodgers worth $8,800. I still have $800 to spend to reach my cap. So let's say that I want to go, I don't know, someone who's a little bit more expensive, probably a little bit better. Let's look at Tom Brady. So I'm going to put Tom Brady in my lineup instead. And as we can see here, it's changed in my lineup table. My budget total has changed, but still within the constraint. And we can also see this represented on the dashboard table. Now in order to see this represented on the chart, we just have to refresh it, and we can see that our quarterback amounts now 9,000. So this is a great tool to use if you're just looking at your lineup and you're saying, okay, where am I spending the most money? Maybe I want to take some of the money in certain categories and put them in other categories, etc. So good tool to use. And that's for all the positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense. Okay, so moving on, I would say 50% of the data that's used for this project is in the lineup tab, and then the other 50% is in the raw data tab. As you can see, there is a bunch of data. And the reason that I've put it into 3 different tables, actually I think I have 5, 3, 4, 4 tables. So the reason that I put data into 4 different tables is just because certain categories I wanted to separate. So for instance, you'll see I have a salaries column here, but I don't have a salaries column in this table. I have touchdowns and yards per game. Just different charts that I wanted to utilize in the dashboard, and we'll be able to look at that in a little bit. But yeah, and then we have kickers over here, and I'm not going to categorize kickers in the same category as quarterbacks, because you'll never see a kicker throw a touchdown, and you'll never see a quarterback kick a field goal. And that same concept goes for defenses as well. So now that we see the tables, we can also see that I've put these tables into pivot tables. So, for example, for the lineup, right? The lineup table we have here, we can see in the lineup pivot table. And the reason that I put them into pivot tables is because on the dashboards, I wanted to make a visual representation of what's going on, make those charts. But I'll get into that in a second. So the lineup pivot table, we have the raw data table, the first table, pivot table, and the raw data, and so on and so forth. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I had to pause because the recording button is right over the cursor that allows me to move from tab to tab. So I apologize about that. Okay, so we have the data, with the raw data, we have all the pivot tables, and now we're going to convert the pivot tables into pivot charts. So, for actually the second pivot chart we have here is top players by points per game, and these points per game are actually going to be fantasy points per game. So what a lot of people like to do is they like to look at their lineups and say, okay, I want to choose the players that are going to give me the most fantasy points, because obviously the more fantasy points that are generated, the better likelihood you have to beat your opponent. Okay, so I have the top 10 that's shown here, or else we could have like a list of hundreds of players. So we can change this based off of the position that you're looking to fulfill. So if we want to look at top 10 quarterbacks based off fantasy points per game, we can see that Tom Brady's throwing 29.6. I'm sorry, generating 29.6 fantasy points per game, all the way down to Matthew Stafford, 19.4. And we can do this for every position. Every position. So this is actually a really useful tool, especially if you want to get your information quick and you're under a time constraint to put your picks in. Okay, so the other chart that I want to show you guys is top players by touchdowns and yards per game. So here, I decided to use touchdowns and yards per game as the measurement for ranking, because touchdowns and yards per game are going to produce the most fantasy points for you. So if you're picking a position based off of touchdowns and yards per game, it's a pretty good indicator that they're going to do well for you. So as we can see here on the axis, primary axis, we have yards per game. We have over here touchdowns that they've produced. The columns representing the yards per game over here. And then the line graph is representing how many touchdowns they've scored. And we could filter this with the slicer based off of the position that you're looking for. So let's say we want to do tight end, right? Looking right off the bat, we can see Greg Olsen is averaging over 100 yards per game, which is really good. It's leading the league, as we could say. And we can also look at the touchdowns that he's received. He's got 2 touchdowns. The top tight end has 4 touchdowns, so it's not that much off. But it's a great way to analyze more of the data and to be able to determine how a player ranks in their position with the rest of the league. So this is another great tool to use. And then, like I mentioned before, the kickers and the defense have to be put in different categories and different charts, because you can't use that same data to compare how they rank with the other, how they rank compared to the NFL in certain positions. So I decided to use percentage of field goals made and the number of field goals made, just because I'm not going to put someone on my team who's likely to miss it, right? If you're kicking 50%, I'm not going to put you on my team, because I think you have a 50-50 shot of making it. So we have the percentages made here, the actual number of field goals made here. Let's say that we wanted to see the top 90, anything over 90% of the field goals made. We could see here, for instance, Adam Vinatieri is kicking 100% of his field goals, and he has made 13 field goals, which compared to the league is tied for the most. So that's a good pick to use. And then finally, we have the defense. This is actually a really cool chart. It's a 3-combo chart. We have points per game. represented by the gray bars. We have rushing yards per game, represented by the orange line graph, and then we have passing yards per game, represented by the blue line graph. And this is more for a matchup for me personally. I like to look at the worst defenses and match them up against potential players that I want to pick. So if I'm looking to pick a quarterback, right, I want to see, okay, what defenses are giving up the most passing yards per game, because that indicates that your quarterback that you pick is usually going to be good. So we can see here that New Orleans is giving up the most, they're giving up over 30 points per game, which is a lot. And then their passing yards, they're giving up a little bit over 300 yards per game, which is if you look at the slicer, there's only 331 is the most, so it's pretty high up there in passing yards allowed. And then rushing yards allowed 121 yards per game. So I'm going to look for a player who's playing New Orleans because they seem to be giving up a lot of yards and points per game. And I decided to leave all the teams up here just to get a better sense of how each defense ranks against other defenses in the league, which is a very good tool to use. So there you have it, my project. I know I'm a little bit over and I apologize for that, but I feel like this is a very useful tool to use when trying to get a competitive edge on daily fantasy sports. And then finally, a specific Excel feature that I found most helpful in the project would definitely have to be this chart right here that ranks the defenses by points per game, passing yards per game, and rushing yards per game. I can look at this quickly and determine, what defense is giving up the most passing yards, rushing yards, points per game, and match those up against potential players that I want to pick. So definitely a great Excel feature supported by a pivot table and slicers. So there you have it. Hope you guys found this enjoyable and useful. And any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. See you later.